Happy Easter, friends. It's the Easter season. It's a season that's 50 days. It's one of the things I love about the church is that the church knows how to celebrate. We celebrate Easter not just for one day, not just on Easter Sunday, but for a whole season, a whole 50 days until Pentecost. So happy Easter. Today we're just going to jump right into the first reading. So if you've been following along with the daily mass readings, you know that the first reading we've kind of been going along in Acts, the Acts of the Apostles. And if you haven't, I'll give you a little summary. So what's been happening is the apostles after Pentecost have gone out and they're living and preaching about who Jesus is and this life that Jesus gave them. But as they do this, they get thrown into jail, and they're in jail overnight, and an angel of the Lord appears to them and frees them from jail and tells them to go and to continue to preach about this life that Jesus has given them. And so then the next day, the Sanhedrin find out that the apostles have gotten out of jail. They gather them back in and they take them back in. And as they're trying to figure out what they should do with these apostles, these men who proclaim who Jesus is. And one of the Pharisees, he asked that the apostles be put outside so he can talk to the rest of the Sanhedrin. So they put the apostles outside, and he's explaining just like his thoughts on the apostles. And he ends with this really beautiful, beautiful line. He says, talking about the apostles and about their mission and their teaching and proclaiming of Jesus, he says, "For if this endeavor or this activity is of human origin, it will destroy itself. But if it comes from God, you will not be able to destroy them. You may even find yourselves fighting against God." And it says they were persuaded by him. I just love that, because now 2,000 years later, right? 2,000 years later, we can see that the church is of God. It has not been destroyed. It has gone through some rough times, but it is still alive and well. Pope Francis, all the cardinals, bishops, priests, they can all trace their spiritual authority back to the apostles, which is really cool. They can trace it all the way back to the apostles. And that's also known as the apostolic succession. And even today, these men, these priests, Pope Francis, all the cardinals and bishops, they're still facing similar resistance, similar persecution. And it's something that's really been brought to my mind as I've been reading this book about St. John Paul II and his 5 Laws by Jason Everett. It's been incredible to read about John Paul II and his life and his journey to becoming a priest and becoming a cardinal and then ultimately the Pope. And just the ways that the Russians, the communists, tried to spy on him and to suppress him and the church in general during that time. And it's really inspired me to pray for Pope Francis and just to pray for all our priests as they go through similar persecutions as the apostles did, as they're on mission to live the same life that the apostles did, to proclaim who Jesus is. But this reading also brings something else to mind to me. It kind of brings to mind the doubt of the Sanhedrin. So they're really doubting what the apostles are saying, who this Jesus person was, that the apostles, that they knew, but who he truly was as the Son of God and his resurrection. And just brings to mind just how we can misunderstand the church's teaching. Like the apostles, they're teaching, they're giving the first church teachings as they're proclaiming who Jesus is and what he taught them. And it's not lost on me either that the gospel, the church never does anything by accident. They always have something good in mind for us. And the gospel today is the beginning of John 6, which is also known as the Bread of Life discourse. And it's one of those teachings that, one of those gospel readings that we relate to the Eucharist, right? We read that, and Jesus proclaimed, like what we get in the gospel today is the multiplication of the bread and the fish for all the people that are there. And it kind of leads later into John 6, into his discourse on him being the bread of life, telling them that he is the bread of life. And even then, even at that time, many of his disciples leave him. Many of the disciples leave Jesus because of what he's teaching, because of what he's saying. And so even today, we can doubt that, right? If they're doubting that when they just, a lot of them had received that miracle, and they're doubting what Jesus says. So surely we can have our own doubts, whether that's about the Eucharist or about other church teachings. I know one of the biggest things for me to really understand the Eucharist was to just read more about it, to learn more about it. I read this book called Jesus and the Jewish Roots of the Eucharist by Dr. Brant Petrie. It's awesome. You can definitely borrow it from me. Let me know and I will let you borrow this copy, because it is so good, and just revealing about the Eucharist and who is in the Eucharist. The Eucharist, right, is just one example of a teaching of the church that can be hard to wrap our minds around. It's the great mystery of our faith, right? The priest says that every Mass when during the prayers of the consecration, like after elevating the host and after elevating the chalice, he says the mystery of faith. It's a mystery. It's hard to wrap our minds around the Eucharist. And it's not the only church teaching that might be difficult to understand until we've dug in a little bit, until we've learned a little bit. So I just want to pose to you, what is that church teaching that you struggle with? Or what are you curious to learn more about? Don't just settle for what you think you know about what the church teaches, but actually dig in and find out what the truth is. What does the church say about these things that we might be curious about or might have always struggled with or really just not known? Don't settle for what you think you know, but actually find out. And in that, who could you ask about that? As Jacob talked about community earlier this week, community reminds us who we are and who Jesus is, right? Community can be, the community is who we run to heaven with. It's who we run along with, and they can help us remove those obstacles that might be on our path on our way to heaven. They can help provide clarity or understanding to something that's difficult for us in our lives, such as a church teaching that we might have always struggled with or not really known about, and might be a stumbling block for us on our way to heaven. And finally, what are you learning during this quarantine time? Are you going to come out of this time with a new skill, with having new knowledge, or are you just going to come out with a dead phone battery? My phone battery is quickly dying from all these video chats that I've been so lucky to be a part of over this time. But what else am I learning? Is that the only thing I'm going to come out of this with? God can work in all things, even those little things that might seem so unrelated to the faith, whether that's learning to cook or refining a skill that maybe we already have, but we just want to build up a little bit more. He can show up in that too. He wants to show up in that. If we're aware, we'll be able to see what he's teaching us about ourselves in that and about himself. For me right now, it's been cooking. He's really been, as I've learned to just make more meals, he's been teaching me a lot through the whole process of cooking about myself and about himself. Because he comes hidden. Our God comes hidden in the ordinary to reveal himself, just as he does in the bread and wine that become, in substance, though not appearance, his body, blood, soul, and divinity. So get out there and learn something and invite others into it as well. Let's dig in a little bit and let's be curious. Know of my prayers for you, and may God bless you.